I'm talking about. Politico reported that Yang has been calling elected officials to see if they may support him for a New York City mayor run. And he's also been in touch with the same consulting firm that helped Michael Bloomberg win his third term as mayor. So that's always a vote of confidence if you're a progressive.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, my excitement levels went quite a bit down as soon as I went one paragraph into this article where, like you said, it says Yang, who of course championed universal basic income program in his presidential run for the Democratic nomination, is also in talks with Tusk Strategies, the consulting firm that worked on Mike Bloomberg's 2009 mayoral campaign. So I'm not 100% sure. I mean, if this is just some completely neutral, business essentially that makes advertisements and promotional material for any candidate of any sort, or if this is
if they work with Mike Bloomberg, they're not freaking neutral.
I mean, any candidate can technically, request or get the help of, a neutral.
Sure, no, I understand. I'm looking at their website right now
to make their ads. In fact, a lot of people thought that Bernie Sanders should have, hired one of these companies like Tusk Strategies instead of going the more independent route, because they're like, bro, if you're serious about winning, you need to run a serious, real campaign to compete with these other, people. So, I mean,
I'm just sus about any company that markets the president of AT&T as a, boasting about how great of work they do on their website. I'm just going through their website. I don't know. I would be sus about it if Bernie Sanders did that. That's one of the things I liked about Bernie Sanders' campaign, is that it was like grassroots through and through. Not that, I think that that's the only way to run a good campaign. And, to be fair,
I think it would be more to compete with the presence of the other big name people.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that he's probably following whatever guidance he was given and saying, like, this is how you have to run if you want to be successful in the mayor's race. Because like we mentioned when we talked to Carlos Menchaca, the mayor race, particularly in New York City, is just an auction for the highest bidder, or at least it has been.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the case. And obviously we'll have to see if Andrew Yang actually declares his candidacy, what kind of tenor his campaign strikes, because we'll see if he leans into the more progressive elements of his presidential campaign, which there were many and which I give him credit for often. But he could also lean into the more, pro-business side of it, like, UBI at the expense of your other social benefits. I'm not going to talk about Medicare for all kind of thing, which would be a lot less exciting. However, given that he's going to be running in New York City, which is, obviously one of the most infamously progressive places in the country, obviously home to AOC and many other recent insurgent progressive victories, I think that he probably will channel a more honestly progressive vision, especially in these times of a coronavirus pandemic. And obviously we criticize Andrew Yang for the way he constructed his universal basic income plan here, and I'm a big advocate for UBI, but I do think we have to give Andrew Yang credit for being a relentless advocate for stimulus checks this entire pandemic, especially going so far as to call out Democratic leadership when many other Democrats, including the squad, would not. So, if he can actually, again, channel some of these more progressive visions, such as decriminalizing all drugs, something he talked about on the campaign trail that no one else did, as well as universal basic income in a way that would be properly constructed, then I think we have a really exciting candidacy on our hands, especially for the mayor of the biggest city in the country, which obviously could serve as the testing ground for all sorts of policies, especially decriminalizing drugs, especially universal basic income policies, which are, again, of needed heightened importance due to the coronavirus pandemic, which is, of course, going to be in the background of everything during this congressional campaign. Obviously, candidates are going to be contrasting their vision for the city with the way that current mayor Bill de Blasio has ran New York City. So I think it'll be an interesting kind of a true battleground of ideas. And hopefully we can have a real battle of ideas that won't just be, the highest bidder basically winning the race and flooding the airwaves. Hopefully we can actually see some good debates and the best vision wins out, but who knows?
Yeah, and I actually think you're completely right that should Andrew Yang, win the presidency, in some, run for mayor and win, we would be able to really get to see, does his solution bear out, right? Because you would get to see a hyper-capitalist, society like the one but in an uber concentrated area like New York City, and, see how much it does alleviate the suffering of the working class when you have skyrocketing rent prices and, economic devastation, but you are able to give them UBI. To what degree does that course correct? To what degree does that alleviate their suffering? And to what degree is business able to, mobilize and pivot to, further capitalize on those people's remaining income. I think that the other questions that I have for Andrew Yang, and if he's going to run for mayor, and one of the things that I would really be excited to see is his platform, because you're right, we're obviously jumping the gun, and my preconceived notions and understanding of Andrew Yang's politics, are obviously leading me to believe that he's going to be friendlier to the Wall Street types in New York City than somebody maybe like Carlos Menchaca, who we've talked to on the podcast, because of his business inclinations, his friendliness with Silicon Valley, his own status as an entrepreneur, and the fact that he's run on this whole reformed capitalist idea for presidency. The couple of things that I would be really interesting to see him talk about would be, one, how to what extent does he support building new public affordable housing in places like Manhattan, Brooklyn, places that, I don't want to just see it all shoved into the back corner of the Bronx and Queens, right? And this is something that I think will really show if he's going to put his money where his mouth is, because there's tremendous financial opposition to getting any kind of what would be considered really affordable housing for working people on Manhattan, right? So that's something that the mayor has a lot of power to do in New York City, would be to push for public city resources to go to constructing public housing, and creating a city, that can actually be livable and inhabitable for people from all economic backgrounds. So that would be one thing that I would be really looking forward to seeing how he responds to that, because I think that'll be telling on how he's going to position himself, either progressive or more neoliberal. The second thing that I would really look for, and to be honest, I don't follow Andrew Yang really religiously, so I'm not sure what he's tweeted about this or what he's talked about. But the other thing that the New York City mayor has a lot of undue power for and is able to really make a lot of moves on would be defunding the NYPD, reallocating a lot of those funds there, closing Rikers Island, decarceration. So, we talked about how Andrew Yang did mention legalization of all drugs in his campaign, decarceration, prison abolition. Those were not words that were thrown around. So, it would be interesting to see where how he understands the moving towards the legalization of all drugs and how he would plan to implement a decarceral strategy in New York City. Because if he were willing to, in a meaningful way, get behind things like housing reform and decarceration and, defunding the NYPD to reallocate those funds, for things that would be more beneficial for working class people, if that's something that he's truly interested in, I could see myself being interested in him as a viable contender. But if not, I think it would illustrate that he might go another way in an office.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree that he'll. My preferred ideal candidate for this would definitely be someone that's outspoken on those issues. I will say that he did say that mass incarceration was the greatest civil rights issue of our time during his campaign, and also came out against mandatory minimums and the war on drugs and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't say he's totally never brought it up or never.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure what his position on that would be.
Yeah. So, he's definitely not a leader out in the streets, but I do think he's, he's given more of a fair shake to the movement than your average Democrat. So I think that's, again, he always kind of treads that line.
Before he got into office, that's something that Bill de Blasio would have done. You know what I mean? Bill de Blasio endorsed Bernie Sanders, but it seems like the mayor, this is just why I'm skeptical, because it seems like the mayoral candidates always clam up as soon as they get into office when it comes to the NYPD. I'm pretty sure they must get a backroom fucking, there's always those jokes about how you get into office and it's hey, unless you want a fucking citywide coup, you better not cut the police budget, because otherwise we're going to fucking break your kneecaps.
And that's another thing that throughout the entire defund the police and Black Lives Matter movement that I've always said is that I do kind of feel bad in a sense for some of the local officials that are tasked with these decisions, because there's not really a whole lot of trial and error that's gone on. It's kind of do we respond to this demand and do this unprecedented thing, or do we not? You're put in a very precarious position as a person, as a mayor or something in that situation. So I think that you definitely want to come at it from a place of having the right policy, knowing not rushing to it, not hastily passing some new budget that does. You need to have a very long conversation and figure out the perfect way to do it. Sit down with the right community advocates and make sure that money is reallocated into the right places, because obviously when it comes to those kind of things, you don't just want to see the social services defunded. You want them to be reallocated into the right places. So I think that there's innovation that needs to be done there, and hopefully Andrew Yang is able to bring to the table some. If he's elected mayor or if he runs for mayor, it would be great if he really does spotlight those issues. Criminal justice. I'm going to sit down with the local chapter of Black Lives Matter or X, Y, and Z civil rights advocacy groups that I want to hear their demands. I want to know their perspective, what I need to do as mayor. That's something that I hope to hear coming from him rhetoric-wise if he does, declare a run for mayor, because obviously New York City has some of the worst inequalities. We see obviously the one of the most classic examples of the unfairness of the drug laws is the fact that on Wall Street you can be walking around with cocaine in your bag and doing it every half hour, but then someone in a less well-off area of New York City might get busted for smoking crack or doing some other drug that's technically also illegal. So we have these rampant inequalities, and like I said, it is good that Yang's acknowledged those, but hopefully he leans into that more in his campaign, because obviously he understands a lot of the right issues. I think it's just kind of a matter of making sure he goes in the right direction. I feel like Andrew Yang is the ultimate candidate that could be pressured to do the right thing if there's the right movement and the right activism there to pressure him. But
I actually would agree with that. I think that by my diagnosis, I think his natural proclivity would be to make some of the wrong choices, and I think that he would naturally listen too much to the technocratic class and to the Wall Street big money oligarchs. But I do think that you're right that unlike a lot of other candidates from the Democratic Party, I would say 95% of them, he actually could be moved from the people, and he seems like and that could be just because he doesn't have a lot of experience in politics, and he might, become a cynic really quick because this is a man that's never held elected office before. We don't really know how he'll govern. He could clam up and become a fucking piece of shit as soon as he gets into office. It's really easy to walk and talk the talk before you have to govern. Making votes and pissing off your donors is hard if you have them, right? So that's something that we have to, a caveat that we just have to lay out there. He's never been in elected office, so we don't know. Because I think he could just as easily, like you said, he could just as easily go either way. My estimation is that he's more likely to go in a way that I'm not super thrilled with.
Yeah, that's fair. But I also think it's a matter of adjusting our expectations. Obviously, I would prefer if Carlos Menchaca, who we talked to on our show, won the race. Obviously, he's in favor of all the right things. But when we have this, dynamic where all of a sudden someone like Andrew Yang enters the race who actually could win, that makes me get excited, because previous to that, I personally don't really think Carlos did have a shot of winning. As much as I loved his vision, same with some of the other progressive voices that are running. So for me, it's more of just like, well, I agree that he's not perfect. Out of the people that could potentially win this thing, I think it's still overall a good thing, because I do think he's a lot better than the competition. In particular, I believe his name is Scott Stringer. Who's a real milquetoast, big money corporate guy. Totally, just look at him. This is not someone who would be innovating or leading the way. He's not someone that's even there rhetorically. The bare minimum, Andrew Yang advocates for a lot of the right things rhetorically. He advocates for UBI. He advocates for ranked choice voting, decriminalizing drugs. So I just think from that perspective, from a realist perspective, and understanding that we probably aren't going to get someone who's going to check off every box. I think Andrew Yang would be a hell of a lot better mayor than fucking Michael Bloomberg, Rudy Giuliani, and Bill de Blasio combined.
Yeah, for sure. And who's the other guy that's running? Oh gosh, he's the Brooklyn president.
Eric Adams. Yep.
But anyway, yeah, that guy was a former cop, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, yeah, then I certainly prefer Yang over him as well. And luckily, it seems like according to this poll, most residents of the city do as well. It looks like 20% of respondents said that Yang would be their top pick, at least according to one poll. And 14 listed Adams, and 11% listed Stringer. So it'll be interesting to see how the ranked choice voting comes into play in this election, because that is another aspect to this race that makes it more interesting. And it looks like, according to this, another heavily rumored candidate is Council Speaker Christine Quinn. So there's a few other, this could get interesting. And
there's a lot of names floating around right now.
Which is actually why Andrew Yang considered apparently running as a third party, maybe a working families party or something. I guess he's decided against that. But so, again, this could go a lot of interesting ways. And just because Yang's running, again, it's not like that's at the expense of all other progressive voices. We're going to keep talking to candidates on our show that we think have the right vision. We're going to be talking soon with a mayoral candidate, Diane I forget her name, but yeah, she's a really progressive candidate who's running, in favor of everything we were just talking about, defunding the police. Diane Morales is her name. I apologize. She's a great candidate. So I think there's a lot of good voices in here that have the potential to bring really interesting ideas to the fold. And I'm excited to see how this race, shakes up. It'll be cool to see what happens. And again, we talked about Nina Turner, potentially, boosting her profile in a national way. This would be, just about the biggest boost to Yang's profile he can imagine. I mean, all three of the last mayors of New York City have gone on to run for president at various points. Post being mayor.
All of it ended up going abysmally. Nobody's.
Yeah, but I do think Andrew Yang, and then that's another thing which really does prove how much of a money grab it really, or much of a money contest it really was. The fact that Michael Bloomberg and fucking Bill de Blasio, who aren't exactly the most inspiring or passionate candidates, could win those the mayoral position in New York. I think Andrew Yang's a much more, in my opinion at least, charismatic and like he's just more relatable, more human, someone that seems more inspiring to me certainly than someone like a Bill de Blasio, or because it's always talked about how Bill de Blasio ran as a progressive and like he pretended to be progressive and then betrayed like if you watch the documentary about Anthony Weiner's campaign for mayor of New York City, which is just called Weiner, great documentary, and it kind of goes into his sex scandals.
Weiner loved his wiener too much.
Yeah, and it goes into all that. It's a great documentary exploring his run for mayor and how that went down as that was going on. But he was actually in many ways out-lefting Bill de Blasio on a lot of issues. He was a lot more outspoken on a lot of leftist issues, a lot more passionate, frankly, a much better candidate if it weren't for all the sexual impropriety. So this notion that Bill de Blasio, like, oh, he was just like Andrew Yang too before he got into office, like I don't think that's entirely true. Bill de Blasio was always a milquetoast, kind of semi-corporate fuck. And to be honest, if it weren't for Anthony Weiner's dick pic thing, he wouldn't even be fucking mayor right now. So I don't think that's quite a fair comparison to make. I think Andrew Yang really did, put himself out there by embracing a policy that really wasn't very popular when he entered it into the discussion. I think it was polling at like 20%.
He also supported Medicare for all and walked it back as soon as he thought it wouldn't be politically salient. So he's not like immune to walking back on it. Like I listened to him on the Joe Rogan podcast talk about the need for Medicare for all. Like he really believed it, and it was actually a pretty inspiring message. And then have him backpedal. Oh, I believe in the spirit of Medicare for all. So I don't know. I think that there's no way to know for sure until he actually gets into elected office and is forced to make a tough decision which way he goes on that. So
yeah, that's all my point is that I think he's a lot more promising than any of these other candidates.
That is true. That is probably true. That's probably true.
And again, when it comes to the company that he'll be in, Rudy Giuliani, namely Michael Bloomberg and Bill de Blasio, I just think that he's in a whole other league when it comes to his ideas, when it comes to his basic philosophy behind governance and the way that government should operate. I don't know. And I also do follow him, not closely, but I keep up with what he talks about. And I just have to say, I have been consistently impressed by the way that Andrew Yang, he's kind of like a Ro Khanna in the sense that I genuinely believe that he, while he may be a little bit more comfortable in the Silicon Valley world of fucking rich people or whatever, that may be true. I do think his heart is in the right place. I do think he understands for and is trying to advocate for positions that will, benefit the working person, the common family that needs money on their table. I genuinely do think his heart is in the right place, and I agree with all your criticisms. Again, for me, it's just like if he could give a lot of these a lot of these issues a national platform, I think that's in the best interest in the movement. And I just think he's a likable, humanistic kind of guy that is able to bridge the gap between. That's why he was considering running third party or independent. I don't think he really feels in the heart of hearts like he's a Nancy Pelosi Democrat or whatever. I genuinely feel like he's trying to, kind of figure out what works. And I think his, bipartisan or not bipartisan, but anti-partisan approach is in some senses innovative for how we should look to, movement building and reaching across the aisle, picking up some of those disaffected Obama voters that turned around and voted for Donald Trump. I think his approach has been admirable.